Hello, hello, and welcome back to the Burnt Pancakes podcast. I am your host, Katie Fensky, and I am here reminding moms that everyone burns the first pancake. Okay, imagine this. You are sitting in a luxurious resort in the Caribbean, the sound of the waves in the background. You're laying by a pool. Everything is gorgeous, and your kids are actually with you, and you're having a wonderful time. Okay, this is not a dream. This is actually a reality. And my guest, Lee Friedman, is going to tell us all about how this can happen. Lee is a mom of two, and she is leaving her job in corporate law to run a family travel company called Mango Tree Travel, which she launched in 2022. Her mission is to help parents feel prepared and optimistic about traveling with kids, something that a lot of us usually dread. The website is a resource where busy moms who don't have the time to plan vacations can find family-friendly hotels that they can actually get excited about. So get ready to pack your bags because we're going to the Caribbean with my guest, Lee. Well, Lee, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you.
I think this one's going to be really, really fun. I think it's very ironic that we're recording this on a day that's pouring down rain, gray and cloudy, and we're going to be talking about Caribbean vacations. I'm all in.
The best time. I know.
Okay, so you are you founded the Mango Tree Travel company, and your job is to help parents travel with their kids.
Yes.
That's incredible. Now, I will say my husband and I are always like, oh, and when the kids are 18 or when the kids are out in the house, we're finally going to take that trip. You believe differently. So tell us a little bit about how this all came about.
Yeah, I do believe differently. I am one of these people, and I think there's a lot of us out there that always said travel was just like a really important part of who I am. And it was increasingly important to me in the years right before I had kids, because I had a disposable income. I had all the time in the world.
Right.
Like it was like,
BC, before kids.
Before kids, I got my paycheck and I would think about constantly like what the next trip was going to be. And partly too was my professional background. I was a lawyer in New York City. I had a very busy job and I wanted to get away whenever I could. And then when I had kids, I kind of, we prioritized keeping it up. And that just was something that we were always going to do. It wasn't really a question for us. Though I learned later, sort of through this process, that is not how it goes for everybody. That transition to traveling with kids can be very daunting, and very overwhelming and very expensive. And that if you don't start doing it right away, the way we did, it then almost sometimes becomes more, that barrier almost becomes greater because it's been longer
pushing it off. No,
Exactly.
I'll do it when they're older. I'll do it when they're older. Yeah.
Exactly. And for me, I'm lucky enough to have sort of had the ability to do it when my kids were young. I very quickly started to see myself as a better parent when I was prioritizing travel. I'm more laid back when I travel than I am when we're like hanging out at my house and I can see the dishes in the kitchen. Like I am a better person when I'm traveling, and it turns out I'm also a better parent when I'm traveling. And that was sort of a reinforcing cycle where I then would prioritize taking more trips. And then we had one really great trip with our daughter, Jane, before COVID, and before we had our second, where we took her to Colombia, and we actually, which was amazing. And we felt that we had a better trip because she was there with us. People really more doors opened for us. Like people were so kind and went out of their way to help us because we had a little one and she had a good temperament for it. By that time she was 3 because we traveled with her quite a bit. And I don't know, there were just like little things about that trip where I thought, it doesn't have to be that you're traveling in spite of having kids and expecting like a lesser than experience. It can even add to your experience because it forces you to travel in slightly different ways when you're traveling with kids. Anyway, that's a long-winded way of saying that this kind of continued to be the soapbox I kept finding myself on about how everybody should travel with their kids. And then COVID hit. I had my second baby. I hit a lull in my career as a lawyer. And I was trying to plan a trip and I couldn't do it. Like the travel planning part of it suddenly became much more frustrating once I had a second. And the internet kept showing me a room with 2 double beds. And I thought, I don't want to stay in that room with my 7-month-old and my 2-year-old. Why do you think I want to stay in that room?
Yeah.
Where is the like creative room arrangement that actually allows
Oh,
me to
interesting.
like find spaces? Like, why do I have to put in the ages of my kid every time I search if you're not actually going to like take that into account when you're showing me pricing? Anyway, so I got very frustrated. I ranted about it over like a bunch of mimosas with my friends. And then I was like, I want to build it. I want to build something better. And then
That's
I
like
sort of like,
the birth of that idea.
yeah,
Like
yeah.
that one moment you can remember sitting there and
Oh
it's like,
God.
this is where it started. Oh,
I
that's so
sometimes regret
exciting.
that. I sometimes regret that moment. Mostly I don't regret that
Like I
moment.
have that moment where I was
Yeah.
in like my job was changing, and my husband said, "Well, if you're not gonna teach, what do you like doing?" And literally the words just blurted out of my mouth. I like talking to moms. And it was just like, ha ha ha, funny. Like, how are you gonna make a career out of that? And I was like, well, fast forward a couple of years and we got a
I love
podcast.
that. That's
So it's like
amazing.
the birth of that idea.
But yeah, and I used to joke, people say like, "Oh, if you weren't X, whatever it is that you're doing, what else would you want to be?" And
Traveling.
people say, so I was like, I kind of want to be a travel agent. I don't know. And
Ah,
people would sort of like roll their eyes at me. And I
right.
was like,
Okay,
oh, but it
do
turns out, anyway, go
traditional
ahead.
travel agents exist anymore? Like, I remember when we were younger, like that's how our parents would do it. And it's like, here is your physical flight ticket. But now with so
Hmm.
much online, are there travel agents or
So that's such an interesting question too, because it's the industry or the profession is making a huge comeback. I did not know this. I had never used a travel
no?
agent before I launched
Yeah.
Mango Tree, and now I'm part of this group of travel advisors. Is sort of the more trendy
Okay.
term for it, and it is a lot less like book my flight and find me a deal. It is a lot more help me design and curate a trip.
Oh,
And it's
awesome.
kind of amazing because it's
Mhm.
people, now me, who spend their days like learning about like what are the best hotels out there for their different types of clients, who are the best partners to work with in country to arrange the transfers and the tours in a way that you're going to feel comfortable with. And then like think of all the legwork you do planning a trip. Like instead that
Done for
gets
you.
handed to you in a curated itinerary that really takes into account like your interests and your family or your like
That's
whatever
so
your
cool.
situation is. And I think it's becoming like a much more popular way to plan travel. As travel planning I think gets more challenging because the online resources have kind of
So much.
overshot, and we're now
Yes.
in like total information overload. And how do
Yes.
you sift through it all to actually find the experience you want and not waste hours and hours of time? And I think that
Mhm.
has opened up this sort of hole for a newer version of a travel advisor to come in and
That's
help
so
people navigate that. Yeah, it's
like,
pretty
just the
cool.
thought of how do we get from the hotel
Yeah,
to or from the airport to the hotel with 2 kids with, car seats,
right.
like,
With car
I don't
seats,
wanna
right?
have to figure that out, like, I would love it if
Right.
someone's like, I've got that covered, I'll tell you how to do it."
Yeah, and that's something that like have noticed that you're not alone of like that's one of the first things we have to think about is like am I bringing my car seats? Are there going to be, because it's not just that, what if I want to go out to dinner while I'm staying at
Mhm.
this resort or wherever you might be staying, but I haven't brought my car seats because I arranged them as part of the transfer? Like,
Yep.
then am I stuck? Like, do
Yeah.
I just bring them with me? And so little things like that. Or like one of the things that always bugs me, and this is true all over the Caribbean, is that a lot of Caribbean restaurants don't open until noon. Like
Oh,
my children don't eat lunch at noon because they're early risers and they wake up
yeah.
early.
They're hungry at
And
6 AM.
exactly, I can navigate that, but I have to think ahead about it, right? Like
Yeah.
I either have to have a kitchen that I can stock with some snacks and breakfast foods, or I just need to know my plan for what's going to happen at 11:30 when they
Yeah.
want lunch and it's not
Before it's
open.
open.
Right.
Whoa.
Yet another one I learned by mistake once. But you don't like think about those little things. But when you work with someone who does it day in and day out, and they've sort of learned like what are the trigger points that sort of parents need to specifically think about,
Yes.
it's kind of helpful. Yeah.
So you had this idea with your friends.
Yeah.
How did it go from that idea to I'm starting this and now eventually quitting your lawyer
I
job?
know. I can't believe
Okay.
it. Um, I, it, I had the time at that moment. Like I said, I had hit a lull. I had just come back from maternity leave. My legal practice sort of hadn't picked back up yet. So
Okay.
I did have some time, which was nice. And we just happened to have a family friend who is a luxury travel advisor
Oh,
in
perfect.
California. And so I think I was on the phone with him 2 days later. And my husband pushed me to set up the call. He said, I think you should try to do this.
Oh,
Why don't
that's
you have
awesome.
some calls? And that first phone call, I sort of learned a little about what it looks like to be that, what this modern day travel agent or travel advisor does.
Mhm.
And I started doing a lot of research to see if this sort of family travel resource that I envisioned, what made sure it wasn't really out there in the way that
Right.
I thought.
Mhm.
And I think like a month later, I had hired somebody to help me build a website. First, I thought I was going to build it myself, which was a really
That's
stupid
awesome.
idea.
Okay, your website is beautiful.
Thank you. Thank
I
you. I
was
did not
looking
build
through
it
it. I'm like,
myself.
this makes me want to take a trip to the Caribbean right now. I want to
Thank
go.
you. Thanks. Well, I hired an amazing woman to help me design and brand it because I wanted it to actually like really sort of convey. But once I realized that that was not something I should do by myself, um, and then I sort of like I just kind of went all in. Like, and when I say sometimes I regret that moment, I I didn't have any idea what it would look like to be an entrepreneur. Like, that's not my
Mhm.
professional background. It's
Yep.
not really what I set out to do. I just had this idea. And now I'm 2 years later. I'm 2 years and change later from like the moment of the idea. And now like I have a business and I have to learn what that looks
Cool.
like. And but I like learning. And so I sort of dove in, and the website itself launched about 9 months after the idea. So I got the website up and I took 9 trips to the Caribbean that year to
That's like
try to
the
really,
perk of this job, right? Your
right?
research.
Yeah, right, which is
Did your
amazing.
kids go on all those trips with you?
So yeah, I made a promise to my husband that I would take at least one child with me on every trip. I think that first year I took one trip by myself because I there was just something with the timing. I can't remember
Yeah.
why now. But every other trip that year was either my whole family with us, one child with us. Some of them we brought like a friend, like one
Okay.
child plus another family with their kid. Like so we kind of mixed it up a little bit over the course of that year. You know what? I bankrolled it myself, and I was lucky enough to have this other income while I was doing it. But that first year, I just sort of was like, let me just see if I can build this
See how this
expertise and
goes.
build this site and see how it goes.
Okay. Were they all in the
That's how
Caribbean? Mostly in the Caribbean is where you went?
that first year I
Okay.
decided I was going to specialize in Caribbean travel. I said, this is one thing I love. It's one thing I know. And I think there's a way to approach Caribbean travel that nobody really does that often, or
Mhm.
at least not as a like focus, which is that, the easiest thing to find in the Caribbean are the big all inclusive resorts. And there's just so much beyond that in the islands in terms of culture and boutique hotels and
Ooh,
adventure. And that's sort of
your
a
jam.
passion of mine. Yeah. And so I was like, let me start with that, right? Like I want to focus on family travel in a way. And that was another big part of the idea. It wasn't just, can we find a hotel room that fits everybody? It was, can we find places where parents would have been excited to go to this hotel even without kids,
Yeah,
or still
that's what
excited to
I
go to this?
see
Like,
in the website. I see it looks
yeah.
luxurious, it looks like a retreat, it looks like an escape, but there are kids there at the same time.
Yes.
It's not
I'm
like
so glad you see that.
we
That was
we
like the
did
goal.
go recently to Legoland, which is
Oh God.
super
Which is,
kid. It was like, it's my son's birthday, this will be great. And it is very much geared towards kids, and they make it like easy for parents to do. But my husband and I were like, I can't believe we're sleeping in a pirate ship tonight. Like, did you ever think
and
we'd be here one day? So it
do
was
this,
fun
right?
for what we wanted, but it was like to
Yes.
have a vacation that our kids could enjoy just as much and we get enough out of it too. Oh,
Ugh.
that's the
And
sweet spot.
I try not to get too much up on like a soapbox about like you have to always travel this way, right? Like you must always travel to places that are sophisticated with your children. I don't believe that. I like Disney. I've been to Disney. I've done all inclusive resorts when it was what our family needed at that
Right.
time. But I also try to mix in trips where we can get excited about them too. And then we kind of have increasingly done that. And then you sort of tweak it as your kids evolve and change and you learn what they like, and you can think, okay, well, how do we factor this in? And that might mean like, this is just like an example. I recently have had a huge crush on the Dolomite region of like northern Italy. Like, I'm
Oh,
desperate to
cool.
go
Yes.
there.
Yeah.
There are all these family hotels there that have like strollers and gear, but like beautiful hiking. So like I could get excited about hiking, and I could also get excited about the playground that looks like a pirate ship that's on the property of this
Right.
hotel, right? So it's not always like it doesn't have to be, they're not mutually exclusive, but it's finding ways to find something for everybody,
Mhm.
um, that I think is hard and overwhelming because you just
Yeah.
don't know, right? Like you
I would
just
say
don't know.
overwhelming. Like, I don't
Yeah.
even know where to start, you know?
Right.
You put in your
Right.
location, you're like, "Oh, there's a million hotels." Like, what do we do?
Right. So how do I start, right? How do I find the ones that are going to be the best for families and for me as a person who's a parent and a person,
Who's also on this
right,
vacation.
right, who's also on this vacation. Exactly. And for some families that means childcare. For some it doesn't. There's all sorts of different things that go into that. But I wanted to like really focus on that aspect of it too.
Okay, so when we first spoke, you told me
Yes.
about your first international trip with your 18-month-old daughter. So, in true burnt pancakes fashion, I think we need to
Yeah.
hear about this travel fail that you had.
Oh man, it was excellent. We so I mentioned my love of the Caribbean. So when my husband and I, before we got married, we spent 6 weeks in Grenada, which is like my favorite Caribbean island. It's sort of where I fell in love with the islands, and we really wanted to go back with our daughter once we had her. We were thinking about what would our first really big trip be, with her, and we thought let's go back to Grenada. And we'd always also wanted to bring friends back with us, so we planned the trip with a couple of friends who didn't have kids. And then several of our sort of new mom friends that we'd met on maternity leave, we sort of said, hey, we're going to do this trip. Does anyone want to come? They barely knew us at that point, and they were like, yeah, we all want to come. So we
Yes.
end up
I'm
in
like,
Grenada
travel
with,
when they're young. Oh my gosh, when they're little babies, they're so much
yeah,
easier.
but so when we were planning it, they were little babies, and that's what we
Oh,
all thought. Once we
then
got
they start
there,
moving.
they were little toddlers,
Oh
and we
no.
had four of them,
Oh
and
no.
we had booked this villa. There's a picture of it on my website, and I'll never forget it. It was an indoor outdoor living space. And there was no air conditioning upstairs. So you had to leave the doors open, which meant
Oh no.
pure access to the pool for the toddlers. And we have one kid in the
Oh,
group who was like always described as a runner. And so you couldn't leave those doors open. And
oh
so
gosh.
you had to close them. So we were all sweating all the time. And then there was a spiral staircase that went up right above the pool, up to a rooftop with a balcony that had a toddler sized gap
Oh
underneath it.
no.
And so these 18 months old kept trying to climb the spiral staircase
Of
to go up
course.
to the very unsafe roof,
Oh my
like
gosh, of
next to the
course.
pool. At one point, my daughter did fall in the pool, and my husband had to like dive in after her.
Oh my
And it was just
gosh.
like you couldn't
Yeah.
take your eyes away from them the
Mhm.
whole
Like,
time.
not relaxing at
No,
all.
at all. And we made it work. We had a great time. Like we got some babysitting help. We found like one room in the villa that was like child safe, and the babysitters were like only allowed
Stick
to
them
be in
in
that room
there.
with our children. Like they just like stay here, it's fine. Um, but in hindsight, that was sort of the first of like, oh, when I was a new parent with a 9-month old, I didn't know what it was going to be like to have an 18-month old. I
Yeah.
didn't even think to check like the size of like what the balcony. I mean, maybe I should have. Like,
Right. You didn't
oh
know to look
man,
for that. Yep.
I just didn't know what to look for at all when we booked it because we just didn't know. And so I always look back on that trip, and I didn't even have this in mind, this idea
Yeah.
of starting a
But it's
family travel
almost like
company.
you went through the hard stuff so that
Yeah.
other people can benefit
Don't
from it.
have to. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So
And
if
like,
someone with a toddler comes to you and says, "I wanna go to the Caribbean," do you have, like, a list of hotels or resorts like, "Okay, this one's perfect for toddlers," and then you can
I
just share
do.
those?
I do. I mean, I've also funny, I've kind of come full circle where I also tend to think that like most islands can work for most families. It's more about like what your tolerance for some of these things are. But for toddlers, like there are a few things that I think just make your life easier. One is like a shallow pool where they can like splash around somewhat
Mm,
independently, where you don't have to be in the water with them
yeah,
every moment, right? Those
yeah,
platform pools, the
yes.
calm beaches. I think that the sleeping arrangement is almost most important when you have a toddler, because that's when, like, if you're in the room with your kid, at least for my kids, like, you're not going to sleep as well. Whereas as you get a
Yes.
little older, you might go back to
Having those
sharing a
twin
space with
bed or the
them.
queen, yeah.
Exactly,
Mhm.
exactly. So little things like that. It's less that I have specific hotels, though I certainly have some favorites for certain age ranges, which is part of the guide I know that you downloaded
I
of like
did
thinking
get the guide
through.
because it's incredible. Yeah, I wanna
Thank
go
you.
through some of those tips in
Yeah,
a
yeah.
minute. Yeah.
But
Mm.
it's more like developing the checklist of, okay, what are the toddler things we should be thinking about? And then I naturally have had some hotels that are that are better for toddlers. But I more have other locations that I do think make sense to wait until kids are older, where you can really take advantage of the activities on that island or that hotel, and that you'd be sort of disappointed to miss if you were
Got it.
there with a toddler.
Right. Like, oh, when they're older, we'll try that. Yeah.
Yeah, I don't like that feeling
Mm.
of being in a place and feeling like you're not getting to experience it and your kid is holding you back from experiencing it. And so that's part of like picking your places somewhat strategically so that you can enjoy it. And that I think is partly why that Colombia trip was so successful for us, because it turned out that like Cartagena is an extraordinarily hot city and everybody takes a siesta in the afternoon. And it has all these beautiful boutique
Sure.
hotels with these courtyard pools that you sort of want to experience. And so with a toddler, we would get up in the morning, we would go have our morning, and we would be excited to go back to the hotel for nap time rather than
Right.
feeling like we were missing out on something to not be able to continue on the adventure. And so it's thinking about like how to structure your days in a way where you'll enjoy it at your kids' specific ages and won't
Mhm.
feel like you're missing out.
Oh my gosh, a place that's designed with a nap time. That's like
Right.
total
Like,
toddler
why wouldn't you
parent.
go there with a toddler?
This
Right. But
is
again, like you
perfect.
don't think about it unless you sort of experience it. And then you think, oh,
Mhm.
this turned out to be a perfect toddler destination. Yeah.
I love it. Well, I would still prefer that place. I love naps.
Yeah.
What
Well,
about
also.
if do you have tips for traveling with like preteens and teens?
Yeah, I think and I don't have preteens and teens yet, so you should know my kids are still young, but from other clients and from families that I've worked with, one of the things that I think a lot of families see as wanting to give their kids some independence, and get their buy-in so that they don't feel like they're being dragged along
Got
on
it.
the trip. So part of it is I think in the pre-planning process of helping say giving them a few options and saying which of these destinations has activities that you would be excited about. Would you want to plan or pick the excursion or the activity or the restaurant so that it's something you can get excited about? And I've always liked small hotels with kids because it allows for a little bit more freedom of movement, where you're not nervous about where they're going to be at all times. And I think with teens in particular, thinking about, is it a place where you'd feel comfortable having them walk down the beach to a restaurant without you?
Mhm.
Is it an island where they can get around by golf cart and they can like take off on the golf cart again without you hovering over them?
Oh my
Is
gosh, my
there,
boy's on a
you
golf
know,
cart. I can't even imagine that yet.
yeah, right,
Trouble.
but like it's trouble. But is there a way you can do it?
Yes.
Like there's a resort in the Bahamas that I really love. It's a private island resort, and there's not a ton going on other than a gorgeous beach, and
Oh.
it's like natural beauty. But you get around by golf cart, and
Oh,
like
and they would
you're
love that.
they could go off and explore the island and you wouldn't feel nervous because there's like literally nowhere for them to
Nowhere
go.
to go.
So
Yeah.
things like that, I think, um working in their interests, whether it's like history or nature, and getting them involved, and giving them some freedom.
That's fun. Okay,
Yeah.
what is your favorite place in the Caribbean to visit?
Oh,
I mean, it probably changes based on how old your kids are, but your like
yeah.
dream place.
I would my favorite place is Grenada. And I just went back a few months ago for the first time since the 18-month-old
Redo.
adventure. Ooh. And I went by myself to stay at my favorite hotel there, which I'd never stayed at. And I send clients there a lot. So I wanted to go and like stay there. And going
Mm,
back, I had that moment of like, oh, yeah, this island is as special as I remember it being now that I'd been to a lot more since the last time I'd been. I also really love Bonaire, which is a little bit off the beaten path for a lot of families. It's a dive island. It's a tiny island down by Aruba. It's a Dutch island, and the snorkeling and the ease of
mm,
it. There's something about that island that I really, really like.
special.
So there might be
Do
like the two.
a lot of these places you need to take like one flight and then like a smaller flight to get in?
Most of my most of them have direct flights from Miami.
Oh, okay.
And so it's often a connecting flight, unless you live in New York. If you're lucky enough to live in New York, you can often fly direct. You are not lucky to live on the West Coast when it comes to Caribbean travel,
That
though
would
I
be a
think
long flight for us,
that's a
but
long flight for you. Though there's a few islands that have direct flights from
oh,
LA.
whoa. I was not
Yeah,
expecting that.
I
What
know.
would be
I
some
always
flying tips for kids? Because with the older kids, they're pretty easy to fly with.
Yes.
What about when you have little kids and you're flying a good distance?
Yeah. I'm going to give a plug for somebody who I love. There's a website called Mini Voyager.
Okay.
The mom who founded it, Bree, she came up with these travel kits for kids of all different ages.
Awesome.
And so rather than because I think one of the big things with little kids is keeping them constantly entertained. And as you know, their attention span is like 5 seconds long.
Yeah.
So she
I've
came
gone
up
through
with
every
these,
toy in
right?
Takeoff.
Yeah, exactly. Oh my God, that's the worst. So she came up with this kit. She sells these kits that are designed, and it comes with all small toys designed for airplanes, but a whole set of them. And so
cool.
it's something you can like swap in and out. I think her kits are amazing. And but that's sort of how my approach was: snacks, all the snacks. And I don't shy away from screen time on airplanes like some parents do, and I do not. And
Same.
if
Before I had kids, I said I wasn't going to, and then we had kids, and we were like, "Yeah, this is totally
this is
fine." Yeah.
I watched 3 movies on an international flight. Like, why are they not allowed to watch 3 movies on an international flight? And so I do, not everybody feels the same way as me on that, but I do feel very strongly that if you're going to put your little kids in front of a tablet on an airplane, that you need to put headphones on them. Don't be that parent that doesn't put headphones on your
Volume up.
But I think you can teach little kids to wear the right headphones. I think you can, and I think 2 things on toys and screens. One is something like headphones for like a 2-year-old. Practice at home so that they associate when you pull those headphones out, they know, oh, hey, I'm going to get screen time if I put that on. I'm going to wear it. And also save some toys for the flights that are new so that it's a surprise. It's something new. They aren't tired of it yet. So like a little bit of preparation and surprise, I think goes a long way.
I've always been so nervous, like when my kids are like kicking the chair and doing this, but I've never had anyone complain. Most of the time they're like, we've all been there. We know how
exactly.
it is. Like, people are so understanding.
Exactly. And if they aren't, I hear there's new airlines that are going to do like adults only sections. They can fly on those airlines.
Yeah. Get me out of that. I'll put my kids right here. Yep. That's
right.
Totally
exactly.
fine.
That's right.
Okay.
Lollipops is another good one.
Yes. Especially because of the ears, right?
Yeah. And they take a long time to eat.
Yeah. Okay. What is your dream vacation spot, like on your bucket list that you haven't been to yet? I know you talked about Italy. Is there anywhere else?
I'm starting to really get excited about the idea of doing a safari with my kids. They're just getting old enough to think about how you could do that in a way that is family friendly, but also on my own personal bucket list. So that is definitely up there. And I'm also, Central America is a big priority for me this year. So we're going to Belize for spring break. I've never gone to Belize. And then I really want to try to learn and understand like Costa Rica, Nicaragua, some of these like Caribbean adjacent countries that also offer, more jungle and land-based.
So cool. I could see this expanding. This totally.
Yeah, it is.
And the European trip. And then yes, that's so fun.
Yeah. I'm going to a conference in Spain this year to learn about like off the beaten path European experiences. So like starting to dip my toe in a little bit of, I think the family hotel market in Europe is incredible. There's a lot there, and it's hard to know about it and learn about it. So I'm excited.
I was very impressed. Our neighbors took their 3 boys. They're like 8, 5, and I think 1 to London and Paris over Thanksgiving break. And I saw her pictures and I was like, oh my God, how is she doing that? I'm so impressed, but it's doable.
But you can do it.
And I don't think we've ever regretted a trip we've taken. They're exhausting. Like the flights are tiring, but when we look back, we never regret it. And my kids still talk about, we went to Chicago last year and they were like, remember that fancy hotel? We said it was not a fancy hotel, but for them, it was like
to them, it was
coolest place ever. It was like 8 stories. It was so cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
Do not regret it.
I had 2 responses to that. One is my husband made me watch a Bluey episode recently. This is every parent who likes travel should watch. And it's one of the new ones that just came out. It's called Relax. And it's about a mom and her family that arrive on vacation. And she keeps trying to get them to do stuff so she can get to the pool and relax. And they keep being like, the bathtub, the shower. And they're just like so excited to see the hotel room.
Yeah.
It was very like on point for my family.
Oh, that's too funny. Yep.
Yeah. But the other, you asked, talking before we got on the phone together about like some tips for thinking about travel with kids. And I've recently been thinking about more and more the idea of travel with your kids being an investment. I don't know, one of it was thinking about like the travel's very expensive right now, or can be. And there's a lot of price pushback I get from parents who are nervous about spending too much. And I was trying to think of like why that is. Like, why do we think about travel that way? And part of it is because we see it as like gluttonous, as like a treat. And as you know, it's like something we're treating ourselves to. And so there's a little bit of that guilt, like, should I really spend $10,000 or $20,000 or however much it's going to cost on this trip? And we feel guilty about it. But when you think about like what you just said, is like you've never regretted any trip that you've taken. And that's not to say you have to spend more money to have great trips, but thinking of it as something you're going to talk about and the investment you're going to remember. And that at these, especially with young kids, thinking about if spending a little bit more money is going to really overall increase your comfort level and happiness level on this trip when your kids are in this window where it feels challenging, like you're not going to look back and remember that extra $500 you spent on this thing that made your whole trip easier, right? Where it's the same thing. Like we think about, if you think about how much you're willing to spend in your daily life, like a couple $100 here or a couple $100 there to make your life easier, it's harder with travel because you often see it in this one big number of like, this is what this trip's going to cost. It's going to be so expensive. Yikes. But have you ever really regretted the investment and doing the trip the way you want to do it? I don't know. I've been thinking about that a lot the last couple of weeks, trying to help some families plan spring breaks and like how I want to advise them to think about trips with their kids.
Right. I'm not just throwing in these extras just because.
Yeah.
Like I do know when we went to Chicago, we splurged on, I cannot remember the travel service, but it was a service that picked us up from the airport, but they had car seats already installed. It was like it was like Uber, but like
with
to the next level. And it was a little bit more expensive, but we got in at, I think 1 a.m. So knowing that we had some guy on his phone saying, I am right here at the gate. I'll be ready for you. The car seats are installed, and got us right to the hotel. It was like, that was worth the extra whatever. Cause we were like, how are we going to bring 3 seats with us? We're not doing that.
Yep. Exactly.
So like, the peace of mind was like, that was worth it.
Yes. And I often tell parents, like, what's the thing that stresses you out? And like, for you, it might be car seats. For somebody else, it might be sharing a sleeping space with kids, or whatever that thing is that it might be, or the plane, of like, try to solve for that piece a little bit ahead of time. You can't solve for everything, right? Travel's unpredictable, and that's part of what makes it great. Kids are unpredictable. But if there's a couple things that are causing you anxiety in the planning process of like, how are we going to handle this? Like, spend a little extra on that thing, you know, and the amount of peace of mind that it gives you can be so like great. Or like London, for example, like I think about some of the museums or tours you'd want to do, and I can imagine a parent being very overwhelmed of like, how are we going to tackle a day in this city in a way that makes sense for our kids? We have a partner in London called Family Twist that does tours, private tours that are all organized with kids in mind. So they'll do like a Harry Potter tour of the city, and they bring like scavenger hunt materials for the kids. And it's like a way to really, again, involve them in some of the sightseeing that might otherwise be boring for them.
That's so
but
cool.
It's like so cool, right? And like those resources are out there and they can take some time to find. And so that's why having somebody in your corner to help you find them is great. But even still, like approaching the trip research in a way that's like, what's stressing me out and how can I make that more kid friendly? How can I fix that thing? Yeah.
So when people come to you, so they go to your website, do you work one-on-one with people, or is it just like, here's your guide? What do you do?
I have a few different ways that I can help families travel, ranging from sort of like depending on the investment you want to make and the amount of customization. So yes, I do one-on-one custom trip planning. So take your trip from A to Z, talk about your goals, help you pick the destination, whether it's the Caribbean or somewhere else, and sort of do the whole thing. I also do, like for the Caribbean, just like destination advice and booking. Like you just want to figure out which island to go to and which hotel, with a little less of the like daily itinerary planning. And then I try to do consultations for families who want to do the planning themselves, but maybe want to run some of these things by someone who's really thought about the family travel
Right.
piece. And then the website was designed. I mean, the original, funny, doing the travel planning was a little bit of a byproduct of the original vision, which was to
Mm,
create a website that itself can be a resource for parents.
okay.
So on the website, there are really detailed hotel profiles for some of my favorite Caribbean hotels that are good for families that can be filtered based on room types, babysitting, the type of pool for toddlers, things like that. And I will always book, like I do complimentary hotel booking. If people find a hotel on our site and want to book it through us to try to get some perks or just to have us
Oh,
sort of
cool.
handle it and be an
Hmm.
extra touch point. I do that as well. And then there's a ton of blog content. I'm putting out travel guides this year for all my favorite islands. So people can buy a travel guide that has sort of like our 3 favorite hotels in this island that are different budgets. So anything from budget to luxury, a 7-day itinerary, links to booking tours. So a little less custom, but more affordable if someone just wants like a resource to help them plan their trip.
Very
So
cool.
it's a sort of a range of things. Yeah.
That's really cool. Okay, random question I thought of.
Yeah.
What is your favorite airline for flying with kids?
Ooh, um, I actually think Southwest is my favorite airline for flying with
Oh,
kids. I do love Southwest. They have
okay.
family boarding right after. They have unassigned seats. They
See,
have
that
family,
stressed me out at first because I was like, "Oh my gosh, what if like we don't all sit together?" Have
but they
you
let
ever had
families
it where
board.
you Okay, I was gonna say, have you
No,
ever had it where you did not get to sit together?
nope. They do A boarding first, and then they do family boarding right after that. So whenever families board, you're usually at like the back 2/3 of the plane because the people in the A
Yeah.
boarding have like
Yeah.
sort of. But by the time
You're
that
together.
group's boarding, there are always still free full rows available. So I've never missed out on sitting with my family. And when you've got a baby in particular, there's that sort of trick of trying to see if they'll let you bring a car seat on and get them their own seat, even if you haven't paid for their
Mhm.
own seat. That's much harder when seats are assigned and they have to move people around to
That's
give you the free
true.
seat. But on Southwest, if there's any empty seats, you're
It's
more
fine.
likely to get that empty middle seat or they'll let you bring
Oh,
your car seat
interesting.
on. And so
Okay.
you end up being able to kind of like get that extra
That's good
space
to
for
know.
free more easily than
Right.
on other airlines.
That is
Yeah.
good to know. And I guess, like,
Yeah.
if you have a teen, they might be like, "Mom, I don't wanna sit by you. This is fine if
Exactly,
I can,
and
like,
this is
move
fine.
around." Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
Oh,
so I don't know.
interesting.
Yeah.
Okay, so if we wanna find you and book our fabulous trip,
Yeah,
how do we find you?
so the website is mangotreetravel.com, and Instagram's another great way to get in touch with me, also Mango Tree Travel, so pretty easy to find. There's forums on the website for if you wanna plan a trip, so it's the easiest way to talk about trip planning. You can see the travel guides on there, but I also always respond to, when I can, to Instagram messages as well
When
if
I'm
people.
not laying by
I
the
shouldn't say
pool or at
always,
the
I was gonna say
beach.
always.
Well, I did get your travel guide, and I will say,
Okay,
like, there was stuff in there that I'm like, never even considered this because I mean, I don't have babies anymore, so now I'm in
yeah.
that, like, elementary school age, and I was like, "Oh, these are brilliant ideas that didn't occur to me." So,
Thank you, and
if
that's
you're
the free
traveling,
travel
get her
guide
guide.
too. Yeah, thank you. I just put it up, so I'm so glad you liked it. It's a free guide to traveling in the Caribbean with kids, and I try to give tips and advice for every age group, and a couple of my favorite hotels for each age group. That just to spark ideas, and it links back to the more detailed hotel profiles on the website. So if you want more
Ready
information,
to
so
plan a dream vacation. This is too
good.
fun.
That's the goal. That's the goal. Thank
Okay,
you.
I was gonna wrap this up, but I wanna know, where did
Yeah.
the name come from?
Oh, Grenada. The book that inspired my husband and I to go spend time in Grenada before we got married was called An Embarrassment of Mangoes.
Oh,
It's a great book about a family that like mortgages their house and sails through the Caribbean. Not a family, a couple, but
okay.
and the author who wrote the book, loved Grenada, and that's how we picked that island. And so once we were thinking about it, and in talking to other friends, I know that like mangoes are not only a symbol of the Caribbean, but sort of like travel in various parts of the world, like around
Mhm.
the equator. There's like all kinds of memories that can be evoked by thinking about mangoes. So, but that's
Oh,
where it
I
came.
love it. It's
That's where
very
it came from.
catchy. It's cute. I like it.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Well, thank you so much for coming on. This was very enlightening and it brought some sunshine to my gloomy, rainy
I'm
day.
glad. I'm glad. Thanks for having me. This has been such a fun chat.
So fun. Thank you. Okay, who is ready to pack their bags and come traveling with my crazy family? Because I think I'm ready to book my vacation. I hope you enjoyed this conversation. It was so fun for me to chat with Lee, and I am so inspired by not only her passion for traveling, but the fact that she is helping parents and moms get away and enjoy life and living and vacations. If you enjoyed this podcast, I would love it if you shared it with someone, if you subscribed to my YouTube channel, or left me a 5-star review. And until next week's conversation, I always want to remind you that everyone burns their first pancake, even while traveling. So just keep flipping.